Thank you for joining me today to talk about building connection and synergy across difference. We've heard for some time now that diverse organizations are more profitable, more creative, more innovative, but how does that work? In a 2017 TED Talk by, I believe the name is Rocio, it's Rocio, Lorenzo, she shared the results of a BCG survey that they conducted to answer the very question about innovation and performance. They asked two things in their survey. They asked how innovative they were, the companies were, and then how diverse they were. And they measured innovation as revenue from new products and services over the preceding 3 years. And to quote Ms. Lorenzo, the results were convincing. She says, quote, "The answer is clear, a clear yes. No ifs, no buts. The data shows that diverse companies were more innovative, period." Now in 2015, McKinsey came out with a report on public companies, and they found that companies that were more ethnically and racially diverse performed better. So back to the question, how does this work? We talk about diversity and performance. How do we optimize that performance and get the 100% team? That is what we are going to explore today. So my name is Jana Etienne. I am a certified diversity executive. I'm also a CPA, and I shifted to this work about 10 years ago. I was in the accounting profession practicing as a CPA for over 26 years, 17 of those years I had my own accounting firm. So I bring my lived experience in our industry. I'm assuming many of you are accountants. So our industry, I bring that experience to my work every day. My practice is centered on something that I call fearless inclusion, which I define as the freedom to be yourself and the ability to create space for others to do the same. I develop trainings and workshops and facilitate conversations and programs focused on helping participants connect mindfulness and self-awareness to their daily actions and words. And this is really focused on this 100% team. The goal is to foster awareness and a collective intention. When inclusivity is embedded in the day-to-day, teams are better able to bridge the gap between that diversity and performance and create those spaces where people feel safe and confident and connected and bonded at work. So this was an article that I read in Forbes magazine. The first time I read it, it instantly clicked for me. So let's look at this quote. This is the quote that inspired today's program. Imagine a team in which each individual performs at their peak and the individuals collaborate perfectly. Let's call this the 100% team. Performance cannot get any better. Suppose now that one team member feels excluded and becomes dissatisfied. Their productivity will drop and cause ripple effects as other team members have to deal with the disruption. Clearly, overall team performance will decrease. Now, what I love about this quote is that it invites us to look at the dynamics of performance and through the lens of engagement and connection, rather than looking at it in terms of disengagement, because that's kind of way we look at it. Oftentimes, we are focused on repair or boosting engagement rather than starting from the 100% perspective and then understanding those lost opportunities. So what does a 100% team look like? Lots of different things. Behaviors, they are collaborative, they share ideas, there's a lot of active listening, giving and receiving of constructive feedback. There's a collective growth mindset, and challenges are seen as opportunities for learning and not as threats to the group. They're adaptive, they're flexible, they can pivot when they need to and maintain focus on the goal. There's this quote I remember from a long time ago. It says something like, obstacles are only something you see when you lose sight of your goal. And I say that because when the team is focused on a shared vision, a shared goal, a shared objective, there are going to be little things that pop up along the way, little rocks in the road. Some of them are big. When you are focusing down the road, you tend to weave your way around them. You pivot around them. You problem solve. That problem solving, by the way, leads to innovation. Otherwise, if you're not focusing on the goal, you're looking down and you're stumbling and you're falling, maybe you get hurt along the way. We have high performing 100% teams. They don't struggle through that. They adapt and they stay focused. And they are enthusiastic about their work, can-do attitude. You remember that? And everybody's engaged. And then there's the culture. And this is the glue. You have all those other behaviors and attributes wrap around that, the culture. The culture is inclusive. The culture is respectful. There's a valuing of diversity of thought and experience. And it's a safe space where risk-taking is encouraged and failures are seen as learning opportunities. So if we go back and look at that quote, it starts with the presumption that everybody's fully engaged, bonded, trusting, etc. But what if looking at this team and we think they're fully engaged, but as it turns out, it's only the appearance of engagement? What if somebody never showed up fully in the first place? Looking at this through the diversity and inclusion lens, could it be that there's somebody that has a difference? Some of them are visible, but many of our differences are invisible. An invisible disability, neurodiversity, something in their background like trauma, or there are all kinds of things that are part of our identities that many of us don't see. In fact, most of our identities are invisible. And so that could be feeding into why somebody's never fully shown up. You don't know that people are bringing their all. They don't feel safe sharing. They're afraid they're going to be stereotyped. There are too many unwritten rules and it's just too much. They just sort of step back. Inclusivity, that wrapping around in the culture, that's critical because in order to enjoy those benefits of diversity, we need to be able to have inclusion to create that safe and bonded space. If diversity is what powers performance, then invites us all, this quote invites us to reimagine it and look at it as what do we need to do to create this space where this 100% team can thrive, rather than what sometimes feels like a diversity and inclusion approach of what do we need to do so that they feel more included. And so this vision of the 100% team is what creates the opportunity. It doesn't guarantee it, but it creates the opportunity. So I just thought I'd paint an example. What does this team look like? Well, I thought an orchestra was a good example because it's a model for a high-performing team. Different instruments, different skill sets, shared vision for what this piece will sound like and feel like. There are different timings and rhythms. In fact, the diversity, you walk into the diversity. Without the diversity, it doesn't quite sound the same. So how does an orchestra parallel this 100% team? Well, you have unique roles and specializations. When I was in practice, I specialized in tax. The thought of it now, I think everybody is glad I don't do it anymore because somebody will get hurt if I did a tax return today. But the specialization in the field of tax is immense. I mean, there are a lot of different specialties. Well, think about the orchestra, just the violins. There are different violins playing different pieces, different sections, different rhythms, different styles, all in the same piece. This specialization is happening in the orchestra, but from the outside observer, we don't really notice it, but we hear the result. And so recognizing that unique skill, differentiating and appreciating that unique specialization, if you will, part of a high-performing team. What about harmony? Harmony is where all of this stuff comes together and it sounds cohesive. The wrong note and we all notice it. And so this is the same thing in a team. In a team, you have harmony of movement, harmony of coordination of work, if you will. You have the conductor. So I'm over here using my hands. So I'm imagining the conductor. And what the conductor is doing is they're guiding the team. This is your team leader. This is the person leading the engagement. Could be the partner on the engagement. It could be the manager on the team. And what the conductor is doing is they're guiding and directing, ensuring things are coming together. So this isn't about micromanagement. Leadership is about aligning efforts toward that shared goal. The shared vision for success, I talked about that, adaptiveness, responsiveness, changing dynamic needs. The client puts in a new request, or something changes at the client, or something happens in the economy that completely shifts the perspective of the engagement. Got to be able to adapt. And then there's the last piece, which is continual learning, because for that orchestra to be successful, they practice, 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 play. And so when you have a team to really be optimizing, you have to be learning. And to learn, you have to share ideas. You have to take risks. You have to try new things, and you have to make mistakes. So there are a lot of things that can cause disengagement, from resistance to the status quo, not enough resources, lack of trust, miscommunication, and all of these things. And so how does this happen? Well, understanding all of this is why we need to think about group behaviors and group dynamics. So for that, let's go all the way back. We're going to go back to humans, just as, basically people. As a species, we are wired to be social. We instinctively and automatically organize ourselves into groups and then create hierarchies within those groups. We learned this at a very early age, and we look at cues to determine social status. That's how we figure out socially, but more importantly, in the workplace, because wherever there are groups of humans, this process happens. And this helps us know who to listen to, who to follow, who to emulate. So social groups, just talked about this, they automatically form. The important thing that I thought was interesting is that at this group formation creates a bonding that deepens the commitment, where loyalty to the group heightens my likelihood of success, which deepens the commitment, which strengthens the bonding, and so it goes. And so there's this cycle, if you will, that happens in any kind of group. And what type of groups are we talking about? We have groups based on a shared identity, like same religion. We have groups that are based on role, technical staff, administrative staff. We have groups based on seniority, partners, senior managers. We have cross-functional teams, which I think is really important, because in a cross-functional team, it's like an orchestra. By design, it's diverse. And as a result of that, we are expecting people to bring that diversity and those different perspectives. And we know there are going to be bumps. We know there are going to be conflicts, but that's part of the inherent team itself. Hint, hint, hint. What we want to do is take that mindset about cross-functional teams and just zoom that out and recognize that we have a cross-functional organization by design. So that same diversity there, we want to pull out and bring it to the whole team. So let's go ahead and launch that first polling question. For those of you who are wondering, is there a polling question? And meanwhile, I'm going to click back up in the Q&A so I can see any questions.
We do have that first poll up on everyone's screen, so go ahead and get your votes in for your CPE credit. We keep our polls open for about 60 seconds to allow you to get your votes in on this platform, and I can see votes coming in. That's wonderful. So thank you so much. And again, this is poll 1 of 5.
Thank you, Vaughn. While the poll is open, I'll share a couple of examples, like tenure-based groups. Those might be your new hire cohort. How many times have you seen, there go the interns, right? Like, they are collectively referred to as a group, and they identify as a group. So I'm curious to see what the results are as they come in myself. I see where we're headed.
All right, we're at a minute, and we've got 93% of the room has voted, so that's wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and close down this poll in 3, 2, and 1. Would you like me to share the results?
Yes, please.
All right, we have them up on the screen. There you are.
So almost half, 44%, say role, tenure, or seniority. Not at all surprising. I don't know the demographics of the participant group in terms of public accounting, business and industry, etc. But in public accounting, well, in accounting in general, that hierarchical structure to some degree is expected, and it's necessary because you need experience to review the work. You need to fumble your way through the work to learn, because we're not going to get it right the first time. So I'll do the work, somebody reviews the work, somebody approves the review, then we finalize. That hierarchy is to be expected. So that grouping is completely normal. But then we have to look at the behaviors of those groups. And by behaviors, there are so many different attributes that you see here, different styles that now influence it. And as we're looking at this list, I want you to keep in mind that when we're talking about diversity, then it creates complexities and nuances and subtleties that change the nature and flavor of things. Okay, I went from an orchestra to a stew. Imagine it's a stew now. Where do I get these ideas? And you drop in a couple of different seasonings. Some seasonings are stronger than others, and they can change the nuances of a dish, not in big ways, but in little ways. That is how diversity starts to influence some of these dynamics. So for example, when you look at the way leaders guide people or motivate people, or how do people exchange information with the group? That's what I mean by communication patterns. Role distribution is often interesting because that's about how different tasks and responsibilities are assigned. When do people raise their hand? When are we assuming a certain person, a certain level, a certain role will do certain types of work? The power dynamics in an organization, in a team, organizations too, but in a team, they influence a lot of this. And influence and power isn't necessarily role specific. And then when you look at the social interactions, you look at things like how do people connect and collaborate? How do they build, and what type of nature of relationships, interpersonal relationships, do they have within and across the group? Cultural differences really can be impactful here because that might create subcultures or smaller clustering of groups within larger teams because of a natural affinity. That's, by the way, it's called the affinity bias. And then there's the psychological factors. And so this is the influence of personality, motivation, emotion, etc. on all of these different behaviors. Psychological safety is where people feel safe enough to challenge, ask a question, show themselves without fear of shame, embarrassment, being stereotyped, or the questioning commitment and competency and all of those things. We'll actually explore that a little bit later. But so all of these different group dynamics then are the ways of all of this coming together. So you have the behaviors, you have the group tendencies, you have the dynamics of social structures that we have as humans in our brain. And then you start to see different styles and patterns emerge based on the diversity of the group. Some of these may come in and then go out, come back in, and it just changes. And this is where we need to think. The 100% team starts to become the 97% team, starts to become the 83% team, possibly back up to the 92% team. It's fluid. So none of this is right or wrong. What this is that collective awareness that I was talking about. So what do these mean? Social facilitation is the tendency to perform differently when people are watching than when you are alone. There's peer pressure, and peer pressure can sometimes result in people changing their mind versus conformity, which is when people just agree with the prevailing attitude, and there might be more covering up there because they are sort of matching what they are perceiving to be the norm in the group. Perception there is important. Polarization is where you might start to see attitudes and ideas becoming stronger and stronger. They're more entrenched, and when that happens, you might see a bigger tension between the groups. Polarizing, we're familiar with that word. Groupthink is when there's this overarching desire for harmony to the point where it undermines decision making. And then unwritten rules are those, implicit expectations and norms that guide group behavior. So there are a lot of these at play, and there aren't necessarily any one over another. And what's important to understand here is that as soon as you layer in difference, when you're the only ... you're the only millennial, You're the only technical staff. You're the only guy. You're the only person whose English isn't their first language. When you add that in and then you start to look down this list, you can start to see that it becomes potentially more complex for that only, for the minority, where there's the chance that the majority might not even notice. And so that's when I would say at the beginning, we had what we thought was 100% team, but as it turns out, that only came to the group not bringing everything for a number of reasons, all of these dynamics, for example. And so they were never 100% team in the first place, even though we thought that that person was bringing their 100%. That's what I liked about that quote, because it helped us see it from the perspective of what do we need to do to maintain that level. So, here, conformity bias, I wanted to put this up here because you've seen conformity and confirmation in a number of different contexts here. There's actually a bias that's also referred to as peer pressure. And I differentiated them on the previous screen, but they can often be taken interchangeably. And this is really common in a group setting because we tend to and can sometimes be swayed by the influence of others. And it does promote uniformity, yes, but harmony, but at the risk of sometimes suppressing individuality. And that suppressing of individuality is where we can have some challenges in a more diverse team. Groupthink. So groupthink is, here's the definition, it's a phenomenon that occurs when the desire for consensus overrides the willingness or capacity for presenting different alternatives and exploring different positions, talking about or sharing an unpopular idea. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. This happens naturally over time. We do compromise, and compromise is a good thing. It happens because we want to avoid conflict, or maybe you've thought these things like, it's not a big enough thing, I'm just going to let it go. Or I'm not sure, so I'm going to wait and see. Or, you know what? Let's see how things develop. I want to see how this happens. How does Bob and Michael and Jane resolve this thing before I jump in, right? So we want to see all of those things. And as a result of that, we might hold back. All right, I'm going to take a quick pause and apologize if there is any net noise coming through. We had a pipe burst. So there is a plumber working in our house right now, cutting down a pipe and installing a new one. So quick sidebar. I appreciate it. If it's too loud, Vaughn, can you let me know if somebody's putting it in the quotes?
No problem.
I'm hearing that and it's a bit distraction, so I apologize. So think about things like the so-called yes man. Maybe we should call it the yes person today. The outsider, somebody we label as a workaholic, or that person is too old to understand the technology. There are all kinds of things that we do when we're talking about groups in groupthink that is what undermines our decision making. So that's stereotyping. We label somebody too old to understand the technology, and as a result, we can dismiss, ignore, gaslight them, if you will, in a lot of different ways that then either shuts them down or the group collectively ignores that. We have the other side of that. Oh, you're too young. You don't have enough experience for that. This is how we did it, so this is how it should be done. And we don't listen to the other perspective because we labelize them. I just created a new word, labelized. Silence does not mean unanimity. Just because everybody doesn't agree, doesn't raise their hand and say something, does not mean we all agree. That is pretty common. I mean, we talked about some of these other things, but what are the risks of this? The risk is we don't explore alternatives. The risk is we make a decision based on limited information. Have you ever been in a meeting where somebody says, here's this idea, what do you think? And now we are all rooted in that one idea and we're trying to figure that one out rather than saying, what are the ideas everybody has? And then we get lots of things that are put out there that we then start to explore. thing is unwritten rules. These are some of the things that we talked about earlier in the dynamics. And the thing about unwritten rules is they happen in all organizations all the time. They govern our behavior, and they're informal, they're implicit. They might be seen as politics, for example. They might be seen as behavioral expectations, and they can create some confusion, especially if you're the new person in the group. And if you're a minority that's not part of the insiders club, we've all heard the term the old boys network, or the gatekeepers, or you're just playing the game, or you need to be playing the game. There are so many different terms that we use because this dynamic is quite common. So think, for example, I worked at an organization once, this is a long time ago, where, work-life balance. No, you don't need to check your email at night. We don't want you to be checking your email on the weekends, when in fact, they absolutely did expect you to be checking your email on the weekends. No. I like it when people are direct. I like it when I want you to say what you think, when in fact, they don't want you to say what you think. Or clothing, what you are or aren't allowed to wear depending on the culture of your organization. And you didn't know that. So you came in wearing a piece of jewelry or putting your hair in a particular way, and nobody says anything. But it is implied, body language, gestures, whether or not you get invited to lunch. All of these things come into play, and it affects those power dynamics and the social dynamics that I was talking about earlier. So how do all of these differences layer in? I've woven some of that into the discussion up until this point. The impact of unconscious bias I talked about. I talked about conformity. I do want to pull out one thing on this slide, and that is the assimilation pressures. So assimilation is a very real strategy. We all do these things because when you are part of a group, oftentimes, for a number of reasons and not all bad, we're going to change our behavior, the things we say, the things we do, the way we behave to mirror the group, and that's okay. The me that you might see at church is not the same me you might see at a bachelorette party, and it's the same me. Those are probably not the best examples, but the point here is that I'm going to show up differently and adjust things. But if I start doing these things out of pressure, I hold back, I cover things up, I start overcompensating. I do what's called code switching, which is when you would change your speech, your appearance, your behaviors, the expressions, so that you can fit in out of pressure. Those assimilation strategies are things that people can start to adopt. Microaggressions are unintentional, often subtle, mostly unintentional actions or comments indirectly and unintentionally that can project a prejudiced attitude or against a person, generally a member of a marginalized group. And those things can happen because of all of these differences and some of those dynamics that are happening. So people say things and do things, and they don't even realize they've offended somebody. That's going to further shut down somebody. Gaslighting is something we've heard a lot of, where somebody is, it's a form of psychological manipulation. And what happens here is that I may say or do things to a colleague, and now the colleague is starting to question their own thinking, their own memory. Maybe that's not the way I thought about it. Maybe I didn't see it the right way. And that type of psychological manipulation is another thing that happens in groups. And by the way, let me go ahead and launch this poll because it's about what we're coming into conversationally.
All right, poll 2 up on your screens now. Go ahead and get your votes in for your CPE credit. 2 of 5. There's 3 more polls after this.
I'm looking at the Q&A and I saw somebody said they are the CFO of an orchestra. Yay, thank you for sharing that. So that example resonated. I am the boss. When I pick my team, I prioritize the qualifications of each team member first to guarantee the jobs will be done, nothing else. And leave that one up there and come back to that one in a little bit. Where are we on the?
We are about 15 more seconds on this second poll. So we
I'm
are
curious.
almost done.
Oh wait, what poll question was this? It is
This
not
is
the
poll 2.
poll.
Oh,
It is not the poll that I thought we were doing. So you know what we're gonna do?
although
You
we're,
had-
right now we're in your organization.
Yeah.
Okay.
The one I was thinking about was terms of familiarity.
Oh,
What do you
okay.
have that as poll 3?
Let me close this poll right now so then I can get back to my screen. It lets me know. And which of the terms you're familiar with?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is poll 3.
Okay. Well, you know what we're gonna do? We're launching poll 3. We're gonna do 2 polls back to back. Are we allowed to do that?
We can. I just realized one thing. So let me just change something on the back end really quickly.
Okay.
Okay, I did do that question correctly. Okay, so I have it as multiple choice. On our first poll, I did not choose it with multiple answers. So I wanted to make sure that I updated this poll to make sure that we have that.
Okay.
All right, here we go.
Folks,
I'm going to
thank you
launch poll
for
number 3.
I appreciate it.
There we are. So poll number 3, and you can check all that apply on this particular poll. Poll 1 said that, but I didn't have it set up correctly. So there you are.
Somebody said thank you. Sorry your pipe burst before the holidays. I appreciate that. Thankfully, our plumber is on top of things. So, but good times. All right. So I wanted to ask people how familiar they were with these terms because we're going to start talking about them. Let me start with, while the poll is open, a definition of stereotypes. A stereotype is a standardized mental picture that is held in common by members of a group that represent an oversimplified opinion of another group. And often not based in fact, it's perception. There's a whole lot that goes into it. And stereotypes in the workplace influence all of those dynamics. And I've been sharing all of those examples as we go along. Misunderstandings, misperceptions, it can lead to reduced morale, people holding back and just choosing to disengage. So let's see what the results of the poll are.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this third poll down in 3, 2, and 1. Let's share the results.
So I see almost half both, almost about a quarter neither, and the rest are in between, maybe one or the other. So I want to walk through these terms and these definitions because I just defined stereotype. What is stereotype threat? So stereotype threat is where, yes.
Sorry, I think something might have gotten stuck. If you don't mind, can you reshare out your slides? Can you stop sharing and then share again? Sometimes with the polls, it just gets a little stuck. So I just want to make sure that we're able. There, perfect. Thank you so much. We are good to go.
All right. Perfect. All right. So stereotype threat is where somebody is afraid they're going to conform or validate a stereotype about their particular group, and as a result, they feel this sense of anxiety. They might start to do some of those strategies where they assimilate. They start to just conform to what everybody else is doing as a way of hiding those differences so that they don't reinforce the stereotype. There's a whole lot of processing that goes on. If you've ever been the only in the room, doesn't matter the only. If you've ever been the only one in a room, and then the rest of the room, there are a lot of people that have a lot in common and you don't feel like you have a lot in common, then you might be familiar with that feeling that you get when you're afraid that if you do or say something, they're going to assume you are ... And that assumption is rooted in a stereotype most often of some kind. That's experience, a stereotype threat. Identity threat, it's very similar, but identity threat is really more broad. It's about social identity, and it can be beyond the stereotypes associated with marginalized groups. And so it can be about experiences that occur across different areas of your life that influence how people perceive you. It could be a sport, a hobby, it could be an educational background, it could be a number of different things. And when that is projected onto you, that underlying anxiety can have the same effect. It causes people to shut down. It causes people to hold back. People might decide to self-isolate. And I don't mean that in the COVID sense. It means that they just never lean in and take advantage or participate in group activities, that kind of thing. So what are these levels of disengagement? I created this spectrum of engagement to sort of create the visual of what happens. We go from the top level, which is our 100% team, highly motivated, exceeding expectations. You know, they are giving everything and putting in their best performance. And then you slowly start to go down depending on those dynamics at play, those identity issues, those challenges, those experiences, individual or collective, that reduce it all the way down. Somewhere along the way, and I don't know where, I think I made a note here that the participants and quiet contributors, remember the term quiet quitting that we used to hear? It's still out there. When we start to see people sliding down to that level, that's what they're doing. And then when you get down to silent spectators, those are the people who are, I'm just in it for the money. There's not a better opportunity. The benefits here are great. So they stay and do just enough to not get fired. Or the people who they're there, but you and I both know they're out looking for a job. So those are the types of things. That is the slide that we see people going through, where we start declining from 100% down to I don't know what percent. This is a great book if you've not seen it. 10 most common triggers for disengagement are in this book. This is where I pulled them from. And the reason that these are important is when we start to see these types of disengagement, when we see going from the 100% team, when we start to pay attention and look more critically at those dynamics, and we can see different people at different levels of engagement, noticing that is important because we presume the 100% team to get the team to stay at 100%. It's about noticing that these things are happening so that we can address culture. Because remember, I said that inclusive culture is the glue that holds all of this together. So how do we disrupt this to bring people back? Because all of us show up at the beginning. Nobody takes a job and then walks into the job disengaged. We walk into our new roles and our new projects and our new teams ready to go. We're excited at the opportunity. We are looking forward to learning and growing as a result of the role or the job. So we start there, but then we can start to get disengaged. So what are these different elements that we need to have to keep that glue strong, or to strengthen that glue? Maybe I shouldn't be using glue now because it's starting to feel weird. But there are a number of different elements that can come into the culture, that can come on the list of things we need to consider when we're looking at culture. I picked these 6 because there are lots of little nuances. Like, for example, empathy is here. It's embedded. It's not specifically called out. So I picked a couple, but this stuff is complicated, and there are a lot of elements in here. Looking here. Okay, no, I thought I saw a question, but it was just somebody was having an issue with the poll. My bad. So let's walk through all of these. We'll start with this poll. This is just a poll so that people can get their CPE. Is this the one we already did, Vaughn? We did.
So yes, we have done that. That was poll 2, and now we've done that, so we're good.
Perfect indeed. All right. So when I said conscious communication, this is about aligning our expression with our intention. Because if you've ever said, well, that's not what I said. Well, that's not what I meant. That wasn't my intention. If you've ever said those things, that's an example of non-conscious communication. And so conscious communication is about self-awareness. It's understanding our own internal thoughts and intentions, which aren't always clear to us. They might be unconscious intentions, and being thoughtful about, so how do I say that so what the person hears is what I want them to hear? Otherwise, I might have an impact on somebody that is a little bit different than what I thought was going to be. Because if you've ever said something or done something and then the person responds differently, that's what we mean by unintended impact. So this is active listening. This is where that empathy comes in. This is being open to ideas. This is communicating honestly. We're actually going to talk about candor here in a moment, because I think that is a really important word for how we communicate in organizations. Inclusive language, speaking of how we communicate. This one's a big one, and we are hearing more about it. And I think it's important for a number of reasons. We probably could do an entire webinar on this, so I'm just going to touch on some highlights here. The thing about language is that our words, what we say, remember that saying, sticks and stones may break your bones, break my bones, but words will never hurt me. We know that's not true. Words matter, and words can provide support, emotional support. We can talk about psychological challenges and the phenomenon of like gaslighting that happens. Words can reinforce stereotypes. Words change. So we need to be thoughtful of those words. And here's the thing, we're going to make mistakes. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So it's understanding, how do you recover from those moments? I call it when you step in the poo. How do you recover rather than just run away? I've said things to people, I promise you, and I never want to have to deal with that person again. I'm so mortified by what I said, and I'm so embarrassed I don't want to ever talk to them again. This is what we mean by conscious communication. It's noticing all of those triggers, being clear on my intention, and then using the words and the language to convey that in a way that isn't marginalizing, in a way that doesn't perpetuate stereotypes, in a way that isn't hurtful. So what are some guidelines? And again, we could stay here all day. But let's start with this top rule. Listen to how other people talk about themselves. When you're not sure, step back, observe, notice. Depending on the relationships, you might want to get to know somebody a little bit more. You might want to ask a question. We need to be thoughtful about how we approach and how we ask so that we aren't offensive in the very ask. And so there are a lot of different things here. For example, she's a soccer mom. Well, perhaps you could say she enjoys supporting her children, her children's games, that she's really passionate about that. Because that terminology about perpetuates a stereotype. And this is true even when the stereotype or the terminology is perceived to be positive. For example, women are compassionate. We need to be thoughtful about that. While well-meaning, it could also be marginalizing. A normative description is something like, well, this is the way we normally do it. Instead, you can say, here's a common way to do this. The language here that we want to be thoughtful of is not language that expresses a value judgment that either explicitly or implicitly says, well, that was a stupid thing to do. Gender neutral language, there are so many examples of gender neutral language that we can be thinking of. Businessman. I say guys all the time. And as soon as it comes out of my mouth, I realize I've done it, and then I apologize. And I'm working on it. And I do this for a living. But this is normal, that it happens. So it's really about noticing it and being mindful of it. It's not because we want to be politically correct, and that's the part we need to think about here. It's about conveying respect and honoring the identity of the other person. And so really thinking through how we say, what we say, is a big piece of how we do all of those dynamics and groups that could then start to crack or break down simply because I said something, didn't realize that I was being dismissive or that's projecting that stereotype on them. They, on the other side, are feeling that identity or stereotype threat and adapting their behavior. I'm oblivious to the insult. Again, we sort of cracked that culture and broke it down. Not so inclusive. A couple more things here. Psychological safety, I actually defined that earlier. Psychological safety is critical if you want people to share that new idea or challenge that the way we do things. Or, when you plot that idea on the table and say, hey, what do you think about this? If somebody doesn't really think that much about it, can they say that safely without risk of repercussion or retribution? So do you have this poll, Vaughn?
Yes, I was just checking right now. So that is
Yeah.
the one I have next. So we can go ahead and launch that.
Perfect. Somebody said in the Q&A, people still say soccer mom. Yeah, actually, I've heard that a lot. So I've also seen some questions here about polls. My slides showed some polls out of sync with when the polls were actually done. So to confirm, Vaughn, this is our 4th poll. So if you
Correct.
missed one, the good news is we have one more. So you'll have an opportunity to do 3, to take 3 of them.
Correct. Yes, we are good to go on this poll, and we got about 30 seconds left on this
Excellent.
4th poll.
Well, while this poll is open, I'll start walking through the psychological safety piece. Because the reason I wanted to ask the poll is to invite people to start to reflect about what's happening in their own organizations. And have you heard any takeaway? Because if you got one from today, perfect, because nobody attends a webinar and walks away with 15 things, although a handful is good too. But my goal is to create some awareness around these things so that we can start trying to drive change and address that disengagement and get it back to 100%.
Right,
So
I'm going to go ahead and close this poll down and share the results on the screen. There you are.
yeah, so this is fascinating because 31% say groupthink, but so many of the other ones are pretty even, which is fascinating and not surprising. Groupthink happens, and it makes sense that it happens because we can't keep going on and on and on. By the way, are you still sharing the poll or can you see my slide?
I was just about to pop in. I think it just got stuck again. Sometimes when I share polls, it hides the presenter share. So yeah, just reshare it and we'll be back to good to go. Perfect.
So
Thank
much
you so
fun.
much. Sorry about that.
That's okay, everybody. I appreciate their patience. So we only have a few minutes left. Let me walk through these pretty quickly. Psychological safety. How do we create the safe space? Well, make it explicit. Say that you want to create safety, safe space rules, organizationally, but in particular on teams, that you want to be able to invite everybody to speak up. Just know that facilitating everybody speaking up does not mean going around the table and asking everybody what they think, because some people need time to process. Some people don't feel comfortable sharing a new idea in a group. As the leader of an organization, it's important to understand there are different ways to make everybody feel safe, and that's the key. In terms of establishing norms for how failure is handled, we want to reinforce that there isn't punishment, that it's okay to make mistakes, that we are going to encourage people to create innovative ideas so that we aren't sabotaging ourselves in the process. We want to invite new ideas, even the wild ones, because usually innovation happens not because we keep doing the same thing, but because we tried this, which sparked that, which made us do this, and oops, we made the mistake, and oh my gosh, that works. That's how innovation happens. It's not linear, and it's because of the spaces where we start pinging and popping and doing lots of different things. And then productive conflict. We have to be able to talk to each other in ways that share unusual ideas and that we can recover from the oopsies. I actually think I addressed this avoiding groupthink already, so I'm going to continue on and talk about candor. I want to make sure I touched on this because we talk about authenticity, we talk about transparency, we talk about being straightforward, but we don't define what that means. And what's important here in terms of candor is about speaking plainly. It's not about being rude. Candor is open, honest, sincere. It's sharing thoughts and feelings. It's clear, but I'm being considerate, because directness, that can almost sometimes strip out the nuances where you no longer seem to be expressing empathy or sensitivity. It is the conscious communication. The difference between being blunt and being candid is that intentionality behind it. There's a book that if you haven't read it, it's an easy read. It's pretty straightforward. Sherry Harley's book. I like this quote because We're invited to speak up, but we don't feel we have permission to speak up. Hashtag unwritten rules. Okay, it's not a hashtag, but just a reminder. So I would encourage you to read this book. I'm not trying to sell it, but I think it's important to understand the difference between candor and directness, because sometimes that is what's undermining that psychological safety. Lived experience, I think we had only 13%, so it was the lowest number. So, but the definition here, since you're going to get all the slides, I also gave you a glossary that has definitions for all these terms on here. The thing about lived experience is that sometimes when somebody shares an idea and that's not something we experienced, we tend to dismiss it. And so the thing about lived experience is respecting that when other people say that's what they experienced, that's what they experienced. Here's some examples of the kind of things we say. Some of this can be marginalizing. Some of this is gaslighting. Well, this is the way we've always done things. Or when somebody says something, oh, you're just being sensitive. These are the things we need to think about that basically shut somebody down and suggest that their identity, their background, their experiences, they're not really valued here. Cultural fluency and awareness is important because that influences the language. Understanding those differences, awareness. Having the skills to interact with people with different backgrounds, fluency. And as organizations become global, even small firms are starting to see partnerships with companies in India and in the Philippines. We are seeing this more and more. So that fluency and awareness, they're two sides of the same coin. It's really important to understand the difference and incorporate that into the way we communicate and interact and understand those dynamics of the group. And then the last one here is allyship. And allyship is really important because allyship is me getting involved with and participating in and supporting, championing, and mentoring in the group and the group mentoring me, groups that I'm not a part of. So as an African-American woman, maybe that's not a good example. Well, yeah, I'm cisgender. I'm female, identify as female. I can join the LGBT group, LGBT employee resource group in my organization as an ally. It just means participating and sharing the load, if you will. And allyship is one of the things that we can do within our teams to support each other and raise each other up.